Alright, sure. Time for a video on Starscream. Hey folks, welcome to yet another Transformers movie character defense video. This video is part 3 of what seems to now be a video series I'm doing of defending the portrayal of characters in the Transformers movies. The first entry was on Shockwave, and the second on Soundwave. I'd highly advise you watch either of those two videos if you haven't already before you watch this one. They explain a lot of prior context rather necessary to fully understanding these character defense videos. But assuming you have seen those videos, and that we're all on the same page here so far, let's move forward. Remember, as I explained in the other two videos, these defenses will not be relying on the various forms of tie-in media for the Transformers movies, like the comics or the games, to make points. I will be going off of just the movies themselves to explain that these characters were good without the need of this outside material. Also, none of what I say about these characters will be any kind of headcanons of mine unless explicitly stated so. Headcanons can be entirely made up, and that defeats the entire purpose of these videos. Rather, I will be pointing out actual plot points and other aspects within these films themselves that say certain things about these characters, bringing to your attention things that you may have not understood, may have missed entirely, and so on and so on. So, due to popular demand, and the fact that he's a character I've also wanted to defend for a while, it's time to cover Starscream, Storcream, Strawcorn, Screm de la Screm. While Shockwave is my favorite Transformers character, I'm of course also a big fan of Starscream, the prideful Decepticon air commander who just absolutely refuses to get along with his boss. Back in the day, when a live-action Transformers film was announced, it was almost a guarantee that Starscream would be making an appearance in it, seeing how he is probably the second most popular Decepticon character ever, second only to Megatron himself. And sure enough, Starscream was one of several other Decepticons who got to appear in the first live-action Transformers movie. And not only that, but due to the overwhelming success of the first film, sequels were soon on the way, with Starscream appearing in most of them, or at least getting referenced in one way or another. His most prominent roles were in the first 3 installments, Transformers, Transformers Revenge of the Fallen, and finally, Transformers Dark of the Moon. And honestly, I loved the guy. He's easily one of my favorite characters from the entire film series, and one of my favorite incarnations of Starscream out there. So, with that being said, do you know what grills my cheese? Like Shockwave and Soundwave, it would seem that not everyone was a fan of this Starscream, with common complaints I've seen for him being that he didn't act like the character of Starscream, didn't look like the character of Starscream, and generally just didn't fit what the character of Starscream is supposed to be. Now, of course, to the surprise of literally nobody, I would argue the exact opposite, as I found this Starscream to be very Starscreamy. I need to hire a writer. And today, I am here to come to Starscream's defense, and explain as to why not only was he utilized well, but also why he was an all-around great adaptation of the character of Starscream. So, like the other videos, my goal here is to, of course, show you why I believe that Starscream was great in the Transformers movies, when it is commonly believed that he was not. And if you still don't agree with me on this by the end of the video, then I hope you will at least be able to understand why I have come to this conclusion. But if you are someone who currently frowns upon this version of Starscream, and I do manage to change your mind on him for the better by the end of this video, then by all means, please let me know in the comments. It shows that these videos are indeed worth my time and effort, and I really appreciate that. And of course, if you already do like movie Starscream, more power to ya. But I'd still recommend you stay around anyway, as I may bring to your attention things that make him even better to you. Alright then, with all that out of the way, let's begin. Continuing the pattern of the last videos in this series, let's start by addressing Starscream's screen time. And you know what? I don't really see many take issue with Starscream's screen time in these movies. Again, in just about all Transformers media, Starscream is consistently the second most commonly reoccurring Decepticon character, second only to Megatron himself. And we see that in the films. For the first 3 films, while the Decepticons are at their height before falling on harder times as a result of the Battle of Chicago, Starscream was arguably the second most prominent Decepticon character after Megatron in these films. Although in the first film, he didn't really have a ton of screen time. You know, it was the first ever live-action Transformers film, they were just kinda testing the water, but afterwards, in the follow-up films, he gets even more prominent roles with even more screen time. But still, of course, as I have mentioned before in other videos, I don't think it's fair to expect all of these characters in these films to get an abundance of screen time. It's incredibly expensive to pull off the Transformers in live action, and to give each of the Transformers characters a huge amount of screen time while still maintaining stellar CGI is just financially impossible for the studio. So because of this, I can forgive the amount of screen time most of these characters end up getting, especially considering how much they pull off or what they do during their amount of time on screen. Which of course goes for Starscream. However, before we get into that, let's address his design. Starscream's design in these films is probably the most commonly criticized thing about him. See, he has 2 designs in these films. Well, actually, they're really the same design, there's just 2 different versions of it. And honestly, I gotta tell ya, I love this design. It's one of my favorite character designs in the whole film series. However, some people claim that this design isn't good because, according to them, it just doesn't look like Starscream or fit his character. To which I'd honestly argue the opposite. I think this design is great for the character of Starscream. Now, as I've said before, I don't believe a character redesign has to be 100% source accurate for it to be good. As long as the design fits the character it's supposed to be, I probably won't have a problem with it. This way, we can get new designs for characters and allow different creativity to shine through, instead of just getting the same thing over and over again. I mean, he's got some of your typical Starscream features, such as the wings on the back, or his jet cockpit being in the middle of his chest, but for the rest of him, I don't know, he just looks sleazy, but in a good way. Like, he's still intimidating, and properly so, but not in the same way that Megatron or Shockwave are. He's not as bulky as them, he's more lanky and thin. Now, throw on top of that his body language, and he just comes across as sly and sleazy, which is perfect for Starscream. This design just screams Starscream to me. Also, as the years went on, I honestly feel like this design has become iconic in its own right. From his proportions, to triangle shape, to chicken-like legs, to bell-shaped head with a rather expressive face, I love it all. And it's hard to confuse him with any other Transformers designs. When you see this design, it's immediately recognizable. He doesn't have his null rays like he often does, but I don't really mind. The original Transformers cartoon just treated them like any other laser weapon most of the time, so I really don't feel like we're missing out on some super special weapon here, and this Starscream still has plenty of fun arm-mounted weapons in their place as is, so I really don't feel like we're missing out. Now, some also take issue with his gray color and later tattoo marks, but we'll cover that in a bit when we discuss his alt mode. And finally, on more of a little personal note, I really don't understand how people will criticize this Starscream for not looking 100% like G1 Starscream, but then praise other Starscream designs like the Transformers Prime one, who arguably looks just as much like G1 Starscream as the live-action one does. Both aren't really that bulky, they're both gray, they both don't have null rays, yet some people, you know who you are, have a double standard where they're okay with one, yet hate the other. Now, I, of course, love both designs, but I'm just saying, if you have to complain, just be consistent. I've seen some take issue with Starscream's alt mode, so I'd like to comment on that real quick before we move into his characterization. In the films, Starscream transforms into a Lockheed Martin F-22 Raptor jet. Now, the issue that people have with this isn't the kind of jet he transforms into, but rather its color. In most iterations, Starscream transforms into one kind of jet or another, typically covered in red and blue colors, which naturally carries over to his robot mode. However, in the films, his jet is just a standard gray color, which of course means that his robot mode also has this gray color, which some take issue with due to the fact he isn't his traditional red and blue. But honestly, Starscream's F-22 Raptor being red and blue would just be, in a sense, unrealistic, as F-22 Raptors are never given these kinds of colors. The reason that the military gives their F-22 Raptors this gray color is allegedly for camouflage efforts, so they don't give them brighter colors such as red and blue. Now, to that, I'm sure some of you are probably thinking, but Blotswave, who cares about if it's realistic or not? It's a fictional movie. They're alien robots from another planet. Who cares how realistic it is? Which, yeah, I get it, but that's kind of the point, you know? Robots in disguise? Alien robots who transform into everyday things in order to disguise themselves? But Blotswave, Optimus transforms into a red and blue truck with flames on it. Why couldn't Starscream's jet just have red and blue as well? Well, the truck isn't some military-regulated vehicle. It can be freely customized. Meanwhile, the F-22 Raptor jets are regulated by the military and have to have a specific set color. Now apply that in-universe, and the jet being red and blue would be an immediate red flag, as not only would it make it stand apart from other jets like it, but it would also signify that there's something wrong about it, since the military doesn't allow those kinds of colors on their jets. We even see something like this happen in Transformers Revenge of the Fallen. Starscream is covered in alien markings in this film, and with these markings being all over his jet mode, he is easily spotted because of them.
That thing's got alien tattoos all over. That ain't Air Force.
The same would happen if he was red and blue. Speaking of though, yeah, in the next film, Starscream has covered himself in Cybertronian markings. Seeing how Megatron was dead, and he had assumed command as leader, I don't think he was planning on returning to Earth anytime soon. No need to keep up the disguise, he was presumably free to cover himself in whatever markings he wanted. But of course, as I said, covering himself in these markings came back to bite him in the ass later, as these markings made it obvious to everyone that he was a Decepticon and not an actual F-22 Raptor. And personally, I actually like the addition of these markings. It just adds a neat pattern to an already good design. With my videos on Shockwave and Soundwave, I went into how the movies showed us that they were behind several huge plans and events, some of which changed the film series forever. That is not exactly the case for Starscream, and that's okay. In most Transformers media, Soundwave and Shockwave are typically big schemers, often responsible for a couple big plans or events. But Starscream? He's usually just along for the ride, with his only real big plan being overthrow Megatron, become leader. Which tends to be an issue I've seen some have with movie Starscream. Some claim that he is loyal to Megatron, something Starscream almost never is, so therefore he is not a good representation of Starscream. However, this isn't accurate to what we're shown, as Starscream is still treacherous in the movies, as Starscreams are, he's just more subtle about it. But in order to explain this, and highlight the rest of his character, as usual, let's go film by film to outline Starscream's role in each of them, starting of course with the first movie. So, let's lay some groundwork. Long ago on planet Cybertron, a planet-wide civil war broke out between the Autobots and the Decepticons, with each side trying to beat the other to reclaiming the Allspark, an all-powerful object said to have given life to the first Cybertronians. The Autobots want the Allspark in order to rebuild their war-torn planet. while the Decepticons want the Allspark in order to use it to conquer more worlds, build new armies, and learn from it the location of the hidden matrix of leadership, which the Fallen needs in order to activate his powerful Star Harvester machine. This conflict eventually led Decepticon leader Megatron to pursue the Allspark across the galaxy towards planet Earth, where they both crashed down, with Megatron crash landing in the Arctic and freezing. The Allspark and a frozen Megatron were both eventually discovered, and a secret government group called Sector 7 took possession of them and placed them under their security, where they remained until modern day. A small group of Decepticons came to Earth to search for the Allspark and for Megatron, a group which included Starscream. And actually, before Starscream even got to Earth, he made a pit stop on Mars. Yeah, if you didn't know, this was Starscream. Given he's still in a Cybertronian form, so he's a little hard to recognize, but just look at the head shape. Only one Transformer in this movie fits this look. And if you needed any more proof, the only Decepticon in the film to get a protoform figure was Starscream. Anyway, we later see Starscream on Earth, as he and the Decepticons prepare to free Megatron and help seize the Allspark. However, since Starscream is constantly backstabbing Megatron, some find it odd that Starscream would help to free Megatron, since that seems to go against what his character typically is. But in this instance, I don't find it to be very out of character at all, mostly due to the context of Starscream's situation. See, Starscream and the Decepticons have long figured out that Megatron, despite being absent for so long, isn't dead. He's just in a stasis of sorts. There's no way Starscream could get away with just not trying to free Megatron. All of the Decepticons, including the highest-ranking Decepticon of them all, the Fallen, as we found out in the sequel, actually like Megatron, and not freeing Megatron would put Starscream at odds with all of them. Not something you want when you hope to be their leader someday. So, in order to look good in front of them all and keep a respectable name for himself, Starscream simply just follows the plan and frees Megatron, and works with the others towards their shared goal. But after that, that's really it for Starscream in this film. Character-wise, anyway, because he participates in the Mission City battle quite a bit. But yeah, since this was the first live-action Transformers film, again, it was just them kinda testing the water, you know? So they didn't really have the necessity, or the budget, to go full throttle with the typical plot lines you may expect to see with some of these characters. That would come later, but there's still a little of it in this film. In the only scene where Starscream really speaks, he attempts to greet his leader, who he hasn't seen in ages after having gone through the trouble of helping to free him, to which Megatron doesn't even thank him and just snaps at him instead. Once Starscream reveals that the Allspark is with the Autobot allied humans, Megatron comments on how Starscream has once again failed him, letting us know that this is apparently something Starscream does pretty often. Which sounds like what you'd probably expect from these two. Actually, while I was here, I wanted to comment on something. See, Starscream here is voiced by the great Charlie Adler, and I've always found it odd that he has all of 2 lines in this film. I mean, even Barricade has more lines than Starscream does, and they still didn't bring on a new voice actor for him. They just had Ironhide's voice actor, Jess Harnell, also do his voice. So I don't know why they'd hire on another voice actor and bring Charlie Adler all the way out to the studio just to record all of 2 lines, when they could have easily just have had another one of their voice actors do the lines instead, like they did before with a character who has even more lines than Starscream. Now, I have a theory that Charlie Adler probably recorded more lines for Starscream in this movie, but for whatever reason, they were cut. I've looked for proof of this theory, but there was nothing. It's just the only thing that makes sense to me, unless Paramount really did have Charlie Adler come all the way out to record 2 lines. Anyway, for the rest of the film, Starscream participates in the final battle quite a bit, even crippling Bumblebee by blasting his legs off as he and Ironhide tried to defend some soldiers from one of his attacks. They even gave Starscream this unique transformation sound effect, that I honestly can never get enough of. I love it, and it carries over into every film he appears in. We see a little bit of Starscream's cowardly side in this film too, as whenever he goes to attack, he'll make sure it's something he can quickly get away from in case of his targets firing back, or when he does actually go head-on with some Autobots, he tends to leave shortly after they open fire on him. Also, some people like to believe that Starscream was one of the jets here that fire at Megatron, as it could be a way for him to secretly blend in and try to help take Megatron down so that he can overthrow him. And while I do like this theory quite a bit, there's really no evidence of it being true. However, it can still be noted that Starscream is certainly absent while Megatron is being shot at. He's chased off by the jets before they launch their attack, and he never comes back to help Megatron. Plus, the final thing we see Starscream do in this movie is take off into the atmosphere, having made no effort to try to get Megatron back, with no clear indication on where he's heading, other than that it's to somewhere without his leader, leaving Megatron far behind. Anyway, in the next film, Transformers Revenge of the Fallen, we find out where Starscream actually went at the end of the first film. As with Megatron out of the way, we see that Starscream has now taken over as leader of the Decepticons, where we see that he's not really been doing a good job, with the Decepticon faction running around in a wild mess. I don't know how some people didn't pick up on this Starscream being treacherous. The guy straight up left his leader for dead to take over his army the literal second he could. Sure, he's not super obvious about his intent of betrayal like he was in the Generation 1 show, as I find him to be more similar to his animated self with how he handles his treachery. See, in Transformers Animated, Starscream acts very loyal to Megatron, but this is, of course, a cover-up of his true intentions, as he'll try to rid himself of Megatron the second he thinks he can do so and get away with it. And I find that film Starscream tends to act in a very similar pattern. Anyway, as I discussed in my video on Soundwave, Starscream taking over provokes Soundwave into launching the mission to resurrect Megatron, which pretty much causes the film to happen, which soon leads to a resurrected Megatron overthrowing Starscream and taking back leadership of the Decepticons. Starscream also has a fairly different voice in this film. He's still voiced by the great Charlie Adler, just this time he makes his voice more higher pitched and scratchy, I guess. It's a voice more in line of what you'd typically expect to hear from Starscream, and not only that, but he gets way more dialogue. Anyway, Starscream, now just trying to avoid any further wrath from Megatron, spends the rest of the film aiding his leader and fellow Decepticons in their mission. From helping to take down Optimus Prime, joining in on the worldwide Decepticon attacks, and trying to take down the Autobots in Egypt several times, Starscream gets plenty to do this time around in this film. We also see more of his cowardice too. Like, at one point, he even encourages Megatron to join him in a cowardly escape in order to ensure that they live to fight another day. Now, throw on top of that an even better voice, treachery, and some characterization, and what we have here is a full-fledged Starscream. Oh, yeah, real quick. This film introduced movie Starscream's now infamous spitting thing. People tend to act like he spits literally every time he speaks, but in all actuality, it seems to only happen when he yells. I really have no problem with it, I just think it adds to the idea of him being a sly, kinda snivelly guy, like I was talking about when discussing his design earlier. It's also much more apparent in this film that Starscream tends to enjoy feeling a kind of sense of superiority to those he views as inferior to him. Like, take that time when he left Megatron behind to take over as leader, for example. But also, around humans or smaller Autobots, he'll tend to get up in their faces, try to be intimidating, go for more close-up attacks, just stuff like that, and that'll be important later. Anyway, in the third film, Transformers Dark of the Moon, we find that Starscream has been hanging around Africa with Megatron and Soundwave ever since the Fallen was defeated in Egypt. We watch as he taunts a weakened Megatron with some fake sentiment, to which Megatron immediately sees through it and snaps at him. It's probably a good thing for Megatron that Soundwave is hanging around though, as I imagine that, without him, Starscream would probably try to take advantage of an unguarded Megatron's weakened state and finish him off. Anyway, as the Decepticon scheme that was arranged and kicked into motion by Shockwave and Soundwave begins to unfold, Starscream hangs around Megatron, constantly questioning him and trying to follow along with the scheme as best he can. You know, the fact that Shockwave and Soundwave were on the ball about this whole scheme with Megatron, while Starscream has stopped all taunting in order to constantly question the happenings of the plan as it unfolds, is showing us that he clearly was left out of most of the planning. Which is kind of funny. I can see why Megatron, Shockwave, and Soundwave wouldn't trust him with the knowledge of their whole plan here. He does play one crucial part in it though, as he was tasked with taking down the Autobot ship, the Xanthium, which the Autobots were forced to board by Turncoat Sentinel Prime, so that he can, allegedly, banish them from Earth. As the reason he actually had them do this was just so Starscream could presumably shoot them out of the sky and easily take them all out at once. However, once the Autobots are seemingly gone and the Decepticon plan now underway, the Decepticons take control of Chicago, where Starscream either tends to hang around Megatron to keep on top of the large operation, or hang around the Chicago skies and take down any oncoming, seemingly inferior enemies. This all reaches a point where Starscream spots Sam Witwicky, the boy who had given him and the Decepticons so much trouble before, with Carly, who have both been split off from the rest of their team. Now, what he doesn't know is that Sam is carrying devices created by the Autobot scientist Wheeljack, one of them being a special type of bomb. Starscream, seeing a chance to crush the human that keeps helping the Autobots defeat his faction, begins to get up in Sam's face with taunts and threats, slicing buses and swatting bins to keep the small humans on the run. However, as Starscream corners Sam, in a life-or-death panic, uses the only thing he has to help defend himself in the moment. One of Wheeljack's tools, a type of grappling glove. He fires it right at Starscream and nails him in the eye, which causes Starscream to drop his whole intimidation act and start panicking. Some Nest soldiers, who have been specifically trained by Autobots on how to take down Decepticons, mind you, find Starscream attacking Sam and Carly and help Sam fight back against him. Starscream tries to retaliate, but he has a hard time defending himself while also trying to remove a grapple hook from his eye. Sam then readies one of Wheeljack's boomsticks and jumps onto Starscream's head, jabbing the explosive in Starscream's eye, which now entirely blinds him. Starscream then begins to really freak out and starts flailing around, doing whatever he can to try to get the humans off of and away from him. With Sam still stuck on the grappling hook, Lennox tries to free him before the bomb in Starscream's eye goes off. Starscream manages to fly up and land on top of a building, as Lennox cuts Sam loose at the last second. Because just as Starscream begins to say that he's going to kill them, the bomb in his eye goes off, blowing his head into several chunks as his lifeless body tumbles to the street below. Honestly, this death scene made me feel uncomfortable watching it. And oddly enough, that's why I like it. It lasts like 2 minutes, and all the while you could just tell that this was going to be the end of Starscream, with the anticipation of just, is it actually going to happen? Oh my god, when's it going to happen? Building the whole time, almost like you're one of the soldiers in the scene experiencing this for themselves. Also, there's just something about Starscream going off about how superior he is to someone, ultimately leading to his own demise, that just feels like ironic justice. Like, do you realize that all this guy had to do was just blast Sam and Carly away with his missiles or something as soon as he landed behind them in order to walk away from this completely okay and successful? But no, he can't do that. He's Starscream. He just had to taunt them by chasing them around. He just had to get up in their faces to try to make them feel inferior to him. Doing this is what gave Sam the time to react and ready the grapple glove, which started the whole process of bringing Starscream down. Starscream has no one to blame for his death except his own ego. And that's what makes me love this death scene. It's just such a Starscream-me way for Starscream to go out. Also, yeah, I really have no problem with Starscream being killed by humans here. Decepticons have been defeated by humans plenty of times in the past, and in this instance, they were humans trained by Autobots to combat Decepticons. Humans using tools specifically made by an Autobot with the purpose of fighting other Cybertronians. Plus, yeah, they were made by Wheeljack, which means you could say that Wheeljack has some responsibility for killing Starscream. With Starscream gone, and his attack having allowed Sam and Carly to meet up with Lennox and his team, it gives them all a chance to come together to lay out key information to strategize a plan to take down Sentinel Prime's pillar and stop the Decepticons. It's not easy, as the Autobots and their allies have to survive being momentarily taken prisoner by Soundwave, deal with Shockwave's attacks, and fight other large battles. Not everyone makes it out alive, but at the end of the day, they do stand victorious over the Decepticons. Plus, with Starscream gone, the Decepticons are without yet another one of their major team players, as Soundwave, Shockwave, and temporarily Megatron are all gone as well, just helping to contribute to the Decepticon faction falling to shambles after the Battle of Chicago with no leaders to lead them. In fact, by the time that the next film, Transformers Age of Extinction, takes place, all of the Decepticons are scattered and in hiding, a far cry from the mighty force that they used to be. Oh, in that film though, Starscream can actually be seen on one of Harold Attinger's cards. Anyhow, a few years later, in Transformers The Last Knight, Autobot Day Trader rolls up to the Autobot scrapyard hideout to give them various things he found on his travels that they may find useful. However, he proudly shows off one of his most impressive findings, that being Starscream's head. And contrary to popular opinion, this actually isn't a plot hole. I'm serious, just let me explain. So, first of all, the reason why many believe that Starscream's head being here is a plot hole is because, well, if Starscream was killed due to Wheeljack's bomb blowing up his head, having been blown into several chunks, then how is it possible for it to be back together here? Well, we actually get part of our answer to that in Transformers Age of Extinction. In that film, Harold Attinger reveals that lots of alien technology was left behind after the Battle of Chicago. And while the robotics company, KSI, confiscated a lot of the technology in order to create their own Transformers, much of it was also confiscated by foreign governments, as well as just everyday civilians. Civilians who went in and took all kinds of alien tech for themselves, which, as were shown, included ship parts, weapons, and yes, even Cybertronian body parts. So, with the knowledge that just about anyone from anywhere was running into Chicago and taking whatever alien objects they could back home with them, it means these alien objects could wind up anywhere. Day Trader says that he found Starscream's head not in Chicago, but in Buffalo, which, based on what we were told in Age of Extinction, tells us that Starscream's head was just another one of dozens of other alien tech that someone had found and taken out of Chicago. Also, we can see welding marks on Starscream's head now, showing us that someone had put it back together, which probably wouldn't be as hard as you may think. Like, his head blew up into several chunks, all of which just landed around the same area. So I don't imagine it would be that hard to find a couple of its major pieces and load them into a truck or something to put them back together later. And this film takes place, what, like a decade after Dark of the Moon does? So whoever took the remains of Starscream's head to Buffalo with them had like 10 years to figure out the rough shape of this thing and weld it back together the best they could. So, just to review, Age of Extinction says that people were looting whatever alien tech they could from Chicago, including body parts. Day Trader says he found the head all the way in Buffalo, which tells us Starscream's head was one of the many alien remains taken away from Chicago. And the weld mark shows us that someone put the thing back together the best they could in the 10 years they've had since Starscream died, before Day Trader found it and took it with him. Also, just the fact that a Steve Buscemi Transformer found the remains of Starscream of all characters is just divine irony, considering, you know, did he predict the future? Anyway, a while later, Megatron makes a deal with the TRF, a paramilitary squad that's after the Autobots and Cade. Megatron is also after Cade, since Barricade informs him that he saw Cade with a Cybertronian talisman that he's after. So in exchange for having some of his Decepticons released, he'd help the TRF go after the Autobots and Cade. Once Megatron leads his group of Decepticons to the Autobot scrapyard hideout that the TRF tracked down, they all find that it would appear that the Autobots have fled. But while there, something else catches Megatron's eye. He finds the head of Starscream. He picks it up and even begins to talk to it. If there was still any doubt from anyone that Starscream's deceptive actions earlier were indeed attempts to overthrow Megatron, Megatron here refers to Starscream as his treacherous friend, letting us know that, yes, Starscream really was the deceptive backstabber we all knew him to be. But I also find it kind of oddly wholesome that he refers to him as a treacherous friend. Because even though Starscream could be a deceiving backstabber, Megatron still viewed him as a friend in a way, as he was someone who, despite everything, had still been by his side for thousands of years, through the ups and downs. But now he's gone, and all Megatron has left is to reflect on the time the two of them spent together, even talking to Starscream's head as if Starscream can still hear him. This is one of my favorite scenes in the film. And this is coming from someone who actually doesn't hate this movie. Yeah, I know. I just love this scene because it's really not that often that we get to see a more sentimental moment with Megatron. Nevertheless, one that touches back to the first films in this series. One that also allows Megatron to connect with his departed friend who we saw him spend 3 films with, plus one he knew for ages before those films ever took place. Anyway, Megatron's reunification with Starscream is interrupted as Hound, who stayed behind to buy the other Autobots and Cade some time, opens fire on Megatron, who quickly begins to retaliate. But as for Starscream, this is where his film story ends. Ironically enough, we last see him wind up at Megatron's side one final time as he fights some Autobots. After Megatron quickly downs Hound, he takes his Decepticons away from the scrapyard to continue to pursue the Autobots and Cade. It's unclear if Megatron took Starscream's head with him, or went back for it later, or just left it there. But honestly, I myself do have a headcanon that Megatron did take Starscream's head with him, or that he at least put it somewhere that he knows where he can go back for it. Hey, look at that. I did one of these videos and it didn't take an utterly absurd amount of time. The issues people had with Starscream are more surface level, I guess, than they were with Shockwave or Soundwave, so I didn't have to dive as deep. But either way, Starscream is still one of my favorite Transformers characters, and his film adaptation needed some defending regardless. So I hope I've managed to shine a new light on Bayverse Starscream for those of you who weren't really fans of him before. But if I still haven't managed to change your mind on anything about him, then at the very least, I hope this video serves as an explanation as to why I personally love this Starscream. I still plan on doing more of these kinds of videos. The next one will probably be on Megatron, but it's gonna be a bit before I get to that one. These kinds of videos take a while to put out, and there's some other stuff I want to talk about first before I get another one of these going, but I will get to it eventually. I just want to thank you all for staying around to hear this out, and of course, thank you all for watching. With Starscream gone and his attack having... I'm gonna drink water now, holy shit. With... Oh, God. With Starscream... Starscream spots Sam, unable to see... Sam... Wait, what? I gotta rewrite this, hold up. Unable to see Sam. Sniff! Snuff! Where's Witwicky? Where's... Lord Megatron.
What the fuck?
Lord Megatron, I don't like to call others jerks, but you're being a real dick!